Hello everybody and welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about the Mongolian Empire from an alternative history point of view, because I think there's a lot of questions to be raised about the legitimacy of the narrative we're given for the Mongolian Empire. So, the Mongol Empire was actually one of the largest empires in the history of the world, and it covered a massive 9 million square miles at its greatest extent. Now, when you actually compare the Mongolian Empire at its height with the Roman Empire, the Mongol Empire was nearly 5 times as large as the Roman Empire. So really a massive, massive empire that was around for centuries. But I have some questions, and some narratives about that empire are actually starting to change. This whole narrative that we're just looking at a nomadic group of people, not really with any permanent settlements, but that narrative of just being nomadic is starting to change because there's a lot of interesting finds that are being discovered on the Mongolian steppes. And I came across this article just talking about how travelers can journey through the areas of Inner Mongolia. You can see ruins of towers and high walls and remains of ancient constructions, but the local inhabitants, they know next to nothing about the residents of these ancient settlements, and their memory hasn't preserved the names of the builders nor of the peoples who used to inhabit these derelict ruins. So there's been a lot of more recent archaeological excavations in Mongolia and Inner Mongolia, and they're finding settlements and they're buried. And just some more articles talking about some of these older sites. Medieval towns in Central Asia were first discovered in the early 1800s. And it wasn't actually until the later 1800s that proper scholarly discovery of these ancient towns took place. So it's very recent actually that they're rediscovering a lot of these buried sites. And there was an expedition in 1890 into this valley, the Orkhon Valley, but the findings made by this expedition included ruins of buried cities in the earth. This is just a photo of a 1976 excavation. So this idea we're just dealing with a nomadic group of people with their yurts and semi-permanent sites, it actually appears that there was a lot more settlement in the past that is virtually unknown. So I wanted to look into the history of the capital, or the first capital of the Mongolian Empire, and that takes you to Karakorum, this capital city, which I believe was the first, and it was established in 1220, but it didn't become an official capital until the 1230s. Under Genghis Khan's son. So you have this capital city of one of the biggest empires that's ever existed, but there's relatively little archaeological attention directed at this site. So I guess this lost capital, Karakorum, I guess just recently has been mapped for the first time, at least in a more comprehensive way, using new magnetic and topographic surveys. So I'm looking into this capital a bit more, and you find out that the city fell into disuse by the early 1400s, so a little after 200 years after it gets established. It falls into disuse, fair enough. But then it was rediscovered in 1889. Now I know it wasn't completely forgotten about, but this capital city is lost basically. It gets rediscovered in 1889. And it wasn't until 1933 that the first archaeological excavations in Karakorum were finally carried out. So that's just fascinating to me. I find that interesting, and came across another article just talking about how Karakorum was the center of the Mongolian Empire, and the history of its foundation is clouded by contradictory evidence. All information has come either from later memorial inscriptions or from chronicles written at least decades after the events at different places. So there's just a lot of interesting information coming from different sources. And so I just wanted to actually take a look at the site. And when you look at some of the more recent excavations at Karakorum, one thing you notice is it is buried. And it's not just buried slightly. it's significantly buried. And I believe this was an excavation done, in the city center of Karakoram. And there has been, in the 2000s, there's been research teams from Germany and Mongolia digging trenches in the city. And these trenches are up to 4 to 5 meters in depth. So we're talking 13 to 16 feet, extending down to the natural ground of the Orkhon Valley. So I mean, just like, what happened? These aren't cultural layers. Something pretty significant happened that covered this area. And whatever this settlement or city was, it came to an end here in a very, it looks to me like a very destructive manner. I don't think this is as any natural progression, but here's just another image from 2003. Unfortunately, it's a stock image, but what are we dealing with here? There's just these buried cities 15 feet deep, and they're getting rediscovered in the 1890s. I guess I'm questioning this whole narrative, but there's some more photos here. They found this pit filled completely with a debris of bricks, sort of brick rubble, brick fill. You see this a lot. So I just thought that was really interesting. And Mongolia, it's surrounded by deserts. Basically, you've got this Taklamakan desert and the Gobi desert, and the Gobi desert extends into Mongolia and China. But I believe there was a destructive event in the first millennium, and it might have caused the creation of a lot of these deserts and these dry areas. And I'm sure a lot of you have looked on Google Earth and you've seen this giant area that appears to have been at one point maybe affected. And I think it happened during a destructive event. I'm not fully on board with the official narrative on how all these deserts were created, but just interesting to look at it from that perspective. And I've touched upon this many times, but I think there was a major destructive event in the first millennium that would have affected a lot of different empires, and maybe even brought an end to what we call the Roman Empire, potentially brought an end to the Mayan Empire. There's dynasties that were in India in the first millennium that blinked out, and this is just what looked like a hill at one point, but turned out to be underneath that. There was an imperial palace and temple. So I think something pretty serious happened, and I think that's what might have happened with a lot of what we're seeing here. Now, I know it's in the 1200s, in the 1300s, but I think it might be tied into this destructive event. Maybe. It's speculation, but I just wanted to mention that. Now, there's another really interesting phenomenon associated with these lost cities. Is there's 2 different types of lost cities they're finding in the steppes in Inner Mongolia. And they're finding more recent abandoned cities. Much less is known about the period of the Qing dynasty. So this is the era in which most modern Mongolian cities are rooted. So they're finding more sites that are buried, these settlements that they know nothing about or virtually nothing about, and they're putting them in a more recent period of time. Initial excavations have revealed a previously unknown site type interpreted as garrisons from the period of the Manchu rule. They're investigating early modern military and monastic sites in central Mongolia. And I think I've got an image of one of these sites. Some of them are very secluded. They're tucked away in valleys, and they're partially buried, but they were rediscovered, in the 2000s. This is just an aerial photo, and they're calling it a Manchu military garrison. So it's not just these buried sites from the Mongolian Empire, also these more recent sites that are buried and are being rediscovered. And it's interesting to me because I've seen this pattern of what I think is 2 destructive events. And these are just some artifacts they're pulling from some of these sites, and the blue and white ceramics, the pottery. And I think that actually ties into a more recent destructive event. And you can find a lot of this pottery it's typically a blue and white, and it was produced in China for hundreds of years. Most of it's from the 1200s to like the 1600s, but they kept producing it later, at least according to the official history. But I think it could date back, even though they're saying this particular pottery, they're saying it dates to the later Qing period, like the 1700s, I believe. They're associating this pottery with the 1700s. I think it might actually date back to the Ming era, because underneath the Forbidden City in Beijing, China. They found underneath it the remains of this, what they're calling a Ming palace, and there was a bunch of pottery found there as well. And I think this might be the remnants of a destructive event. And I think that some of these sites might belong to that destructive event, even though they're given different dates. Like this is given, I think, a date of the 1700s, and this buried site here, it's associated with the Ming dynasty, so that's 13 to 1600s, but I think they might actually be connected. Again, speculative, but so it's just interesting to me. There's two different types of buried settlements in Mongolia that are being rediscovered because it fits, I think, this bigger pattern of these two destructive events in the last 2,000 years. But again, that's just an opinion. And, I came across some interesting articles talking about looking into the coins and of the Mongolian Empire, questioning the written script, and questioning a lot of different aspects of the Mongolian Empire. And some of them date back to like 2011. So people have really been questioning the validity of the Mongolian Empire, even before this alt history subject became more popular. So I'll leave a link to some of those articles, and you can look into it if you're interested. But there's a lot of questions you can raise. Why did the Mongols not have their own artisans? And because there's a lot of written accounts about people going to them, visit the Khans, and I guess all of it I think is questionable, but I'll leave a link to the article. And I guess there's still the hunt for the lost tomb of Genghis Khan, and there's this big monument that you can go and visit, but I guess his tomb hasn't been found. I think it's because it might not even exist, but again, that's just my view or opinion. So yeah, I just wanted to do a brief touch on this because I just found this idea of there's two different types of lost cities being found in more recent times. I thought that was real interesting, and it's something very tangible that we can look at. So I think that's all I have for you for today on this subject. I just want to give a big shout out once again to all my patrons. Really appreciate all the help and support. It goes a long way, so thank you very much. And with that said, until next time, take care. Bye.